There is an old saying in the social science departments and government cabinets all over the world. They argue with a smirk that economists are the only professionals that can be wrong every single time and still keep their jobs. And to be honest, it's true. Beyond the basics of supply and demand that ought to regulate the entire distribution of prices and the GDP, economists generally are never completely right. There were those that expected a recession in 2008 and were lauded as geniuses when it actually happened, only to dramatically underestimate the decade of growth that would follow. The reason for this is that making predictions is tough. The fog of the present clouds much of what is to come, and black swan events are always lurking in that fog, ready to jump at you and make your beautiful model seem ridiculous in retrospect. Oh, you think GDP is gonna keep on growing for another 3 years? Here, have a pandemic. Oh, you say it will take 3 years for full recovery. Oh, that's cute. Have a war and have a collapse of the supply gas in Europe. And I know, no one cries for economists. After all, they spend all day thinking about dirty topics like how money flows and how underemployment rises. But I would say that there is a cohort of the population even more despised than economists. You know them, you tolerate them, politicians. Politicians are similar to economists in that they are made responsible for taming and pushing the economy of a nation towards a particular point. Generally, this point is growth. Different parties do so in different ways. Generally, the left would do so by raising taxes on high earners, and by doing so redirect wealth from the haves to the have-nots via government expenditure. The right would do the opposite, cut taxes in both high and low earners, and let the free hand of the market sort it all out. Again, this is an oversimplification. I'm sure that there are plenty of examples of the opposite being true. But there is a fundamental difference between economists and politicians. Economists investigate and guess. Politicians promise. It is an undeniable notion of democratic government that in the campaign trail, as they see their numbers go up when they argue for or against certain economic factors, promises start escaping their mouths of politicians, indicating that if they got elected they would do this or that. Tell me if you have heard any of this before. If I were elected, I would reduce immigration. If I were elected, I would lower the income tax 3%. If I were elected, I would make it so that all companies pay less taxes per year. If I were elected, I would put tariffs on foreign goods to protect our economy. Today in Rebel Economics, we will look at how the world, democracies, and their economies would be if politicians were required by law to implement any promise that they make to the public. We are aware that such a world would have a vastly different legal structure behind the executive power than ours, since the only real mechanism that many democracies have to hold their elected representatives accountable for their broken promises is, after the fact, deciding not to vote for them in the next election. So, welcome to another episode of What If, here at Rebel Economics, where we ask questions about how the world would be if certain policies were implemented. We have an entire playlist on our channel, and linked in the description with our thought experiments. Like, what if there was a sugar tax? What if every industry was privatized? Or what if all salaries were made public? So check it out. Besides that, if you enjoy our content, please consider dropping a like and subscribing, we really appreciate it. But now, back to the video. To fully explain this what if exercise, let's imagine that there was a change in the constitutions of most modern democracies, starting that in order to drive accountability, every political proposal included in the official campaign of a particular party, be it in writing or repeated through the process of elections, would be implemented, or otherwise the party would automatically get excluded from the following election. I know this sounds kind of undemocratic, and I don't think for a second that there is a chance in hell of it actually happening in the real world. But it is a fun experiment, so let's go. There is a website called PolitiFact that tracks the promises made by candidates to the US Senate and presidency that went on to win the elections. The data is gathered and evaluated by the Poynter Institute, who analyzes all promises made by a given individual, giving insight to what degree they are realized, and then it aggregates those percentages to give politicians a score of their ability to realize their proposals. For example, the following image outlines all of the promises made by then candidate Joe Biden since he went into office. This may have changed by the time you see it, but on average, about 22% kept promises, and 33% in the works during his second year as president. The Democrat is not doing bad in the work department. Biden has successfully satisfied promises he made in the campaign trail, like tightening the Made in America rules to drive up export quality, re-establish connection with allies to develop the next generation 5G network lines, or offering small businesses a restart package after the crisis of 2020. Conversely, Biden has also outright broken the promise he made of regulating and then outright banning the practice of fracking in federal land. The large majority of promises made are still in the works, as it should be, given the fact that Biden is still only in his second year, like the student loan forgiveness program or working out a tax reform to guarantee that no one making less than $400,000 will experience a tax increase. Donald Trump's scores, they look quite different. The ex-president promised quite a bit in the 2016 campaign trail, and a majority of his promises are considered to be broken, with a whopping 53% of them not being realized. Here we have his proposal to a lifetime ban on foreign lobbyists raising money for American elections, creating a health savings account to reduce the pressure on families caused by the expensive health system, or repeal Obamacare. Conversely, he was able to keep 23% of his promises and reach a compromise in about 22% of them, meaning that he was able to realize or partly realize about half of what he promised. And that's not too bad, to be honest. Examples of this include the raising of tariffs on foreign goods imported into the US, decree the use of the US-made steel for infrastructure projects, and the regulation of NAFTA's free trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the US. Trump's partial realization of 47% of his promises is not bad, and it is not entirely fair to compare their broken promises meter, which now stands at 1% for Biden versus 53% for Trump, because Biden still has 2 years to go, and hence all of the promises could still be realized. Whereas Trump is out of there, so there is nothing he can do about those unsatisfied proposals. PolitiFact outlines the notion of just how difficult it is, both to comply with what is promised in the campaign trail, as honest intentions are met with brutal reality, and how complicated it is for citizens to hold leaders accountable when they break more than half of their promises. Obama is stated to have broken 23% of his promises by PolitiFact, which goes to show that this is not entirely a partisan issue, even if statistically speaking, Trump did leave more promises unfilled. The effects of the aforementioned requirements to satisfy everything that is promised during the campaign of an elected representative would, therefore, bring positive and negative effects. Let's consider the positive first. The most basic benefit is the fact that voters would actually get what they voted for. If democracy is a method to societally influence the future of our economy, then making sure that our elected representatives actually do what they promise would be an absolute win, both for our trust in the system and to actually realize the promise of democratized rule. It may also have the effect of reducing populism. I believe that politicians can make bonkers claims that will never in a million years get realized, since there is no method to hold them accountable, and it will bring votes in the short run. Think of Trump's pathetic wall section that is more like a fence, or Obama's dumb promise to double the exports of the US in just 5 years. At face values, those are ridiculous proposals to almost anyone, but they appeal to the core base of international liberals in Obama's case and MAGA nationalists in Trump's case. I believe that such enhanced accountability, as the one that we're describing here today, would do away with all of these pipe dreams, who speak to the heart of voters but have no cost structure to back them up, nor mechanisms to realistically implement. A decrease in populist policy making would, I believe, reduce disparity between the parties, approaching them to a moderate center, at least when it comes to the economic side of policy. Whether the social side of their proposals will follow, I am not qualified to argue. However, there will also be the negative side to this situation. For example, the fact that ever-occurrent event of the elected party losing the House and the Senate halfway through their 4 years in office would essentially mean deadlock of the government. The opposition, be they Democrats or Republicans, are known to block a myriad of policies developed by the chief executive once they have the majority. This has happened to Trump and Obama and will most likely happen to Biden. In our experiment, the opposition will have even more incentive to do so, since if they manage to block the realization of such campaign promises, they would become the de facto only party for the next election, since the incumbent won't be allowed to run in the next election. I hope it is quite clear to all of us why this is undesirable. No process that starts with the words single party can end well. And finally, the fixation on satisfying the proposals, while laudable and somewhat the very point of democracy, would also compromise the government's ability to adapt and respond to the changing landscape and context of the world's economy. In part, the nimbleness of the executive would be diminished, as it keeps an eye on the past to guarantee their status as eligible for the next election by trying to satisfy their promises, but they will not be able to respond to the events in the world that require government actions with the same effect. I mean, think of what the war in Ukraine or the pandemic would have been like if the governments were busy doing their own thing to satisfy promises whose importance might pale in the light of the new reality. If you are from a country where this happened, you don't have to imagine it. The truth is that politicians, like economists, are not clairvoyant. They don't know whether their analysis and their promises would come true in the future. Some more than others should be careful as to what they promise, if they're in the habit of building castles in clouds that would never come true. But it's still the correct decision for citizens to want to hold their elected leaders accountable. However, a world in which politicians had to comply by what they say, while satisfactory in the short run and arguably more democratic, might bring in more problems than it solves. So, what do you think? Let me know about this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, drop a like and consider subscribing. More videos on the What If series are coming down the pipeline in the future weeks, and that's a promise I'm willing to keep. I will see you in the next one.